Hey, I'm Mike Farrington. Welcome back to the boardroom. In this video, I'd like to share a new style of sharpening jig that I have developed. It makes sharpening fast and easy. It'll sharpen all the common woodworking tools. Why don't we start with a demonstration and then I'll dive into the details after that. All right, so what is this thing? It's a chunk of ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene. It's been machined with bevels and fences and stuff to allow sharpening of a variety of tools. It's held to this mount by a couple of thumb screws. And this mount allows for clamping into bench vise. So let's take a look at a 1-inch chisel here. We're going to sharpen this with an 8000 gritstone. Step 1, a couple of dots of water on both sharpening jig and the sharpening stone. Okay, now it's ready to go. Chisel held in place against this stop with pressure that way. Stone goes on top, and I like to start with a clean stone so I know if I'm making any headway, because swarf will be left behind. So up and towards the fence, and just move the stone back and forth. Couldn't be easier. Okay, so we know we're making a little bit of headway. Let's take a look at the end of our chisel here. All right, so after the bevel is sufficiently polished, I like to flip the stone over, and I have these stops. Actually set a bit of an angle so that I can wedge the stone in place. And then I like to go back to the back side of the chisel and just give it a little bit of polishing as well. By switching polishing back and forth between the back and the bevel, the wire edge created when sharpening is more gently broken away, which makes for a sharper tool. All right, now that you've seen the basic functionality of the jig, why don't we take a closer look and I'll walk you through all of the details. I consider this the front side of the sharpening jig. The bevel is set at 32.5 degrees and both sides of this fence are 90 degrees. These two outside fences are set at 90.5 degrees. These are designed to knock the corners off of a plane blade. And while not a true camber, it does help reduce or eliminate track marks when planing wider boards. Plus, knocking the corners off with this jig is way easier than planing a good quality camber onto a plane blade. I like to count equal strokes on both corners so things stay symmetrical. Here's a shot taken from a microscope of the knocked down corner. Switching to the other side of the jig is done with a couple 1/4 20 thumb screws, easy enough. The bevel on this side is set at 25 degrees. This triangle is designed to sharpen skew chisels at a 30-degree skew. I don't know about you, but I've always struggled with sharpening skew chisels. With this jig, it really is very easy. Well, there it is, left and right skew chisels, razor sharp and ready for work. Next up is a 90-degree stop. For my purposes, this is the second most used station. Finer chisels and some of my block plane blades are sharpened here. Last but not least, this is a 20.5 degree bevel station. This is for the finest of paring chisels. This creates a very sharp point, but the shallow bevel angle makes it delicate. Let's take a minute to look at a few other types of blades. Fishtail chisels are very hard to sharpen. It can be done by bumping the point up against a stop, then squaring the cutting edge up to the stone. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's still the easiest way that I have found. Next, this is a router plane blade. Super easy to sharpen on this jig, really standard operating procedure. We'll talk about that angle in just a minute. This is a 1/8 inch wide chisel. Narrow chisels are notoriously difficult to sharpen. With this jig, easy, consistent, and repeatable. Not a problem at all. Here's the jig fence. It is important that the tool side and cutting edge be ground at approximately 90 degrees to each other, since it's the tool side that is referenced during sharpening. If the tool has been ground significantly off of 90 degrees, sharpening will only take place at the point, and material will need to be ground down until sharpening has taken place across the entire cutting edge. Here are 3 examples where the cutting edges were not ground at 90 degrees to the side. This really isn't a huge deal, and as you can see, the problem does fix itself. It just takes more work. So we have a small to big, a big to small, and this last one's a more extreme example, and as I look more closely, it looks like there's some more work to sharpen the whole edge. Here are a couple examples where the grinding is far closer to 90 degrees. As you can see, the polished area is very consistent from edge to edge. More boring whiteboard drawings. This is the last one, I promise. Continuing on the top of grinding, as with any other sharpening method, the initial bevel needs to be ground with enough relief such that there isn't interference with the cutting edge reaching the stone. As you can see here, the cutting edge and stone will make contact, versus this example where there's interference. Okay, this could be the most important tidbit of the whole deal. Where the tool is held is critical when using this jig. Your thumb or finger must be up close to the stone. If it's down low, the tool will wobble, and none of us want a wobbly tool. So keep support up close to the stone. Now, if the edge of your stone is sharp, well, chamfer it a little bit because the stone may bump your thumb or finger once in a while. All right, next on the agenda is to talk about the mounts. It's important to mount this jig securely, so why don't we dive in and take a look at these 2 different versions. All right, so whatever you end up mounting this jig to, a couple things remain the same. We have some 1/4 by 30 millimeter thumb screws, and those correspond to some holes, 4 inches on center, 2 15/16 from the edge. The jig is 6 inches wide, so that allows it to hang over a little bit. I drill these at 5/16 to allow a little bit of play. Just makes it easier to clamp things down. So I call this one in the bench, I call this one on the bench. Let's see how both of them work. All right, so style 1, which is my preferred style, just simply goes anywhere in a bench vise and clamp it down. Now you're ready to go. Okay, the second style is kind of like a diving board or a pier. I call this on the bench, and just because it clamps to the bench. Just get some clamps, F-style clamps, or quick clamps, or whatever clamps you like, and you're in business. Easy enough. I thought it would be a good idea to show how awesome this jig is in real life. So let's start with the tool directly off the bench grinder. I have a really wacky setup. It's a microscope with my phone clamped to it. And here's a shot of the blade ground at 80 grit. I start off with a 1000 grit stone, which knocks down the 80 grit with reasonable speed. I'd like to mention one benefit this jig has is there is 0 setup with regard to bevel. Since the angles are fixed each and every time the jig is used, you will be sharpening at the exact same bevel and therefore right up to the cutting edge with 0 guesswork. This is a neat shot. It's easy to see where the 1000 grit stone did its job, and here it is under the microscope. Moving on to the 5000 grit stone, and because the bevel angle is constant, those mid-project touch-up sharpenings are very fast. I always like to check for swarf while I'm sharpening to make sure I'm making contact. Also, normally I don't bother even starting with a 1000 grit stone. I just go right to the 5000. So long as my grind is at 90 degrees, 5000 is a great starting point. Next up, 8000 grit, of course. I think I shorted this one a little bit. I probably could have spent more time with this stone. Close-up of the 8000. Finally, I move on to a 12,000 grit stone. Since this is my final grit, after polishing the bevel, I switch between back and bevel and give each a polish. Here's where those stops on the mount come in handy. And again, I do this to gently fold and remove the wire edge. I would say a 12,000 grit stone is really not needed. 5,000 or 8,000 create a sharp enough tool. The 12,000 is for those times you want to show off your newly developed sharpening jig. Speaking of showing off, let's have a look at the results. I reinstall the blade in my mighty Lie-Nielsen No. 4 smoothing plane. Take a few shavings. Anytime you're showing off, though, you need to break out the micrometer just to confirm that your shavings are crazy thin. If you haven't seen one of these before, no big deal. It just says I've cut a slice of wood that is about 1/3 the thickness of a piece of paper, which just confirms that the tool is very, very sharp. Hopefully I'm not gilding the lily here, but if you look carefully, I'm planing with the grain of the wood. The grain is running up towards the end of the board, which is to be expected, right? However, what happens when I flip the board around, ? For suspense? You got that right. Perfect shaving and a nice shiny surface left behind, not a hint of tear out. Let's talk for a second about wear. Some of you may be concerned that this jig will wear down over time. First of all things wear out eventually. This is the same material that's used in hip replacement surgeries, and they measure wear in millions of cycles. If you're using a 1K or higher stone, they just don't have enough bite to really dig in and cause significant wear on this surface. Plus, the water acts as a bit of a lubricant to hydroplane the stone a little bit. So with that said, this jig is not designed to grind bevels. It's designed to put the final polish on a tool prior to use. If you were to get in there with a 220 grit stone and just start grinding away, setting up bevels on tools, yeah, that probably would wear it out prematurely. But if you're just using polishing stones with regular use, you're going to get many years of service out of this jig. All right, let's talk history for a minute. I came up with this idea about 5 years ago. I've had it in constant use in my shop for that entire time. Over the years, I've come up with, I don't know, maybe 25 different iterations, some with large changes, some with small changes. At the end of it though, I think I've boiled it down to something that's very simple and very functional. In the future, however, I plan on coming up with some more layouts. Specifically, I'm thinking about one with higher bevel angles for bevel up bench planes. Also, I'm considering one that's longer that has more bevels and fences to accommodate a wider variety of tools. Okay, if you need a jig for your shop to help get your tools razor sharp and ready for work, this jig is for you. It works awesome. It works so awesome. I'm trying not to use any four-letter words here. I'll have them for sale on my website, MikeFarrington.com. Feel free to email me questions there. For the video, questions, comments, fears, or concerns, post them below. Thanks for watching. Till next time.